So now we're almost to what Jung's original desire for people was with all of this, because Jung actually was very he kind of didn't like it being turned into typology systems. He didn't like when people did that, and in part because he was afraid that it would throw individuals off the scent of the point of, or his purpose, which was individuation, understanding oneself to a level where an individuation, we've talked about this in like, well, I've talked about it endlessly in previous places, but it's like, that means whole self. It means not divided, right? And the word individuation comes from the concept of like an atom, right? If you slice the atom, it's no longer a thing, right? So becoming an individuated person means that you're aware of the whole self to a point where you might as well just be one big atom, right? There's no house divided here. And so he was afraid that typology systems would slice us up. And he wasn't entirely wrong. There is a little bit of slicing and dicing that happens within typology. But it's also an access point, I think, fundamentally for where he wanted people to head. So I can see why he didn't like it, but I also see why it's necessary. It kind of makes me think of that concept that we actually, Robert Anton Wilson said that the easiest way to be brainwashed is to be born. And we have to be brainwashed. If we don't get brainwashed into a language or into socializing or brainwashed into civilization, we become feral. And at a certain point, we can't learn anymore. Yeah. So it's like we have to become brainwashed to de-brainwash ourselves or to have any sort of control over our thoughts at all. Otherwise, we become feral and we lose all capacity to control ourselves or to control our thoughts. So it's a necessary evil. And I believe that getting into the Myers-Briggs system for this contemporary world is a quote unquote necessary evil. And I don't think it's an evil, but I would say it's the best access point to get to where Jung was hoping people would get to. And that is, once you've gotten to this place of self-inquiry, once you've gotten to this place of understanding the system, now you can tap into and truly understand like John's work as a Jungian psychotherapist, which is archetypes. So there's archetypal energies that Dr. John Beebe has associated with each of the 8 functions, right? And in the position that we experience them in. And it's not, I used to think it was an overly elegant theory, but that was before we did coaching with John, and now I understand it. Now I get it. And basically, it's not that they're intrinsically associated with these archetypal energies that Jung came up with. It's that they have a tendency to tap into those archetypal energies that are already inside us anyway. And so, again, it's just an access point. And once you start tapping into those archetypal energies, it's almost like there's a baton that gets handed off where it stops being about the functions and starts being about our archetypal energies. And that's where Jung wanted us to go in the first place. And that's, as far as I can tell, now, of course, anytime we reach the acme of something, we always think we're at final form. But at this point, to me, that's where we really hit the Van Gogh level. That's where things go psycho-spiritual. Yeah. Right? And that's where we are able to do things like understand our shadow, particularly if we're communicating with another person who is doing the same work. So Jung indicated that we can't get to our shadow alone. It has to be reflected back. And he called it a psyche-to-psyche experience, which is why he believed therapy was so important. The model, John's model with archetypes, or just really any model that taps into these awarenesses and understanding, particularly when it's been built on a bedrock of just laying all of these foundations that started with stereotypes and memes, but then it ended up with understanding the differences between ourselves and others. And then it ended up becoming a more fleshed out awareness and understanding of the complex dynamics within the self. And then it ends up being able to do prescription into growth and development. And then it ends up being an understanding of sort of our archetypal energies as people and the ability to merge it all together. And now we're able to tap into things like the shadow, which wasn't available to us before, because the model itself mirrors it back. Yeah. Right? The model stands in for a therapist in some ways. I'm not saying that the model is a replacement for therapists. Please do not take that out of context if this ends up in one of those 60-seconders. But I'm saying that the model can be a tool to reflect back the self that normally we would have needed a whole played out concept of another person reflecting it back, and then be in a moment where we could receive it. And the model can point that out for us. And so now we enter psychospiritual territory, which is whole self. Now we can see persona, we can see ego, we can see shadow, we can see the whole enchilada, the unindividuated or the individuated person, the undivided person. And one could argue that gives us access to our purpose, an understanding of who we were meant to be, an understanding of what our path is. You can align it with a deity or a divinity and say, this is what God intended me to be. Or you could just say, this is the most of me I can become, right? Now we're tapped into something that is, I think, truly divine.